What we're working on today is a 2003 Chrysler PT Cruiser that failed Virginia state inspection for front brakes, rear shocks, and a left inner tie rod end. If we had let the shop do this with a bill that was already $350 for tires, oil change, and state inspection, the bill probably would have been well over $1,000. Decided to go ahead and let's do this ourselves. Anyhow, here we go. Now, here are all the parts we're going to need for this, excluding any maintenance items like fluids, brake cleaner, stuff like that. We only needed a left outer tie rod end, but from Amazon, we were able to purchase the entire front end rebuild of 2 outer tie rods. They also threw in some shop towels, it looks like, which is always a plus. And we got 2 shocks for the rear. Had good ratings. I haven't heard of the brand before, but got 2 of those instead of just the one that it failed for. And it looks like we got all these parts together for just over $170, where at the local parts store would have been about $250, and we wouldn't have got the whole front end. But we're going to go ahead and do this video and replace these parts, and hopefully it helps somebody out. To begin any brake job, you're going to have to take the wheel off. In order to take the wheel off, you're going to need to suspend your vehicle off the ground so the wheel can come off without having friction on the surface of the ground. Luckily, we have a pump jack here, and to properly suspend your vehicle, lots of vehicles have mount points that you can suspend from. Now, this particular vehicle has a reinforced point along this pinch weld. Now, you can see right behind there, that's the place we're going to place the jack and lift the vehicle. Now that our wheel is safely off the ground, we can go ahead and pull these lug nuts off and get to the brakes behind. Now that our wheel's out of the way, we have clear access to our brake rotors and our brake caliper, which actually squeezes your brake pads together around your rotor. You have 2 bolts to get removed back here to take the caliper off and get to those brake pads. This particular caliper uses a 12mm bolt, so that fits on there snugly, and we can remove those. Now, sometimes if any of these bolts are seized and you feel like they're too strong and you're going to break them, you can spray some penetrating catalyst like PB Blaster on here and let it soak, and that should loosen up the bolts enough to break loose. But we're going to go ahead and remove these and get going. Now that we have our bolts off, the caliper, as long as it's loose enough, should be able to just slide off. We work that off there, and that comes loose. We'll have to press in this caliper to give us room for the new brake pads, which we'll set this out of the way for now. Now, the caliper rods on these, which are called slide bolts, now these will just pop off, and a good brake job, if there's any rust on here, you can grind it off. And then our brakes came with some handy brake lubricant, name brand Bosch. And we're going to put some of that lubricant on these bolts to make these slides slide a little freer. And that helps make sure you get even brake wear when you're braking. But we're doing a full brake job, so we're going to replace these rotors also. So you still have this brake caliper bracket sitting here. In order to break those off, you have 2 bigger bolts in the back, one here and one on the lower side. We'll have to break those off to get this bracket off to replace our rotor. So we'll do that next. Now that we have the bolts out, which ended up being 18mm, and a little bit stronger than I thought, it took a little bit of extra force to get them out, but we were able to pry them out with some extra leverage. And I recommend having a ratchet or a ratcheting wrench to get them the rest of the way out, because they have quite a few threads. And it takes a little bit if you're hand wrenching. But the bracket just slides right off. You can see it here. Along with the brake hardware we'll be replacing, these 2 clips on these ends. We'll replace those when we're done. And now your rotor should be able to just slide right off. If you notice your rotor sticking, you can lightly tap the back of it all the way around with a hammer to break it loose. There could be rust, which is bonding it to the back of the spindle here. So see, just slides off, and we'll be ready to replace. Now while we're here, we know that we're going to be replacing the tie rod ends and the ball joint later. You can see our ball joint down here. That will be replacing. It's not a press end, so it should be pretty easy. And our tie rod ends are here. Here's our outer, which connects to the knuckle. Then that threads onto the inner tie rod end, which connects us directly to our steering rack. These are the key components in your steering system. So if they're loose or the joints are broken, they'll definitely fail state inspection because that's a pending failure. And if they break, it could definitely risk your life. But next thing we'll do is replace the rotor. And then we're going to press in the caliper and get everything back together. Now, there are nicer caliper presses out there, but all I have is this manual screw type, which you can pick up relatively cheap at almost any parts store. As the press head, I'm just using the old brake pad, which you look, it's still relatively thick. I haven't looked at the passenger side yet, but kind of disappointed that they failed me for inspection on these. But they did say the rotor thickness was under spec, which I guess it could be true if these brake pads were replaced without replacing the rotors last time. But we're going to go ahead and press this caliper and move on. In case you haven't noticed, I've been fighting with my my press here. It's really old and I haven't used it in a couple of years. But the actual threaded piece that holds the bolt through the press plate here is spinning because the bolt's rusted. So I've used some Marvel oil and I've been lubricating it and holding it in place and hoping that it works. But we'll see. In case you're curious how this works, this press plate here presses against the inside of the caliper on this side, and as you screw in the threaded bolt here, it slowly presses in, and then it's going to press against this caliper here, and will press it evenly back into the caliper. If you use anything like a C-clamp and you don't have a plate here against it, you'll use the edges of this hollow piston, and when you do that, it may not press in evenly, and you'll get it jammed, or you could break your caliper, all kinds of fun stuff. But in this event, the fluid will get inside the caliper will get pressed back through the line and back into your brake reservoir. And hopefully, if my press works correctly, we'll get this pressed in just a few moments and get our brakes on. Now that we got our caliper pressed in most of the way, hopefully the brake pads will fit. But here's a warning to you: when you get a brand new brake rotor, these rotors come with a film on them, which basically keeps them clean, and it may be just a release from the molding and machining process. But they sell this. This is ideally what it's for. It's a brake parts cleaner. Most people use it to clean everything in a car, but it's to basically release this molding film. Just give that a good spray. I'm going to wipe that off, because if you don't, and you put your brakes together, you will end up getting a lot of smoke from your brakes. I know it scares a lot of people, but we'll go ahead and clean that release agent off here the best we can, so we don't want any smoking or anything after the brakes get put on. If you don't get it off all the way, it's okay. It'll just cause a little smoke, like I said. So I set the rotor on here backwards so I get the back side first. Spray this side, clean it off. And we'll get that all assembled, and we should have a nice new brake side. Now, when putting the new pads on, I like to lubricate all the friction surfaces. The surface that goes against the bracket, the new hardware we put on, the new clips, and then the side that touches the calipers. This is to try my best to prevent any squealing or squeaking when pressing the brakes. Now, they're ceramic brake pads, so they're supposed to reduce noise.
So we'll see. We'll go ahead and put it all together, lube it up, and our brake job should be done. Okay, we got one side completed. Rotors are on. Oh, rotor is on. Brake pads are in the caliper. Caliper's been tightened. A few things you want to make sure. Make sure that caliper's pressed in as far as possible. I had to press mine a little bit more because if not, it's not going to slide over the pads with the new rotor. Once it's installed, make sure your brake line's not twisted or bound. You may have the calipers rotated around too much. You have to flip it to get that unbound. If so, make sure you don't cross thread your bolts. It's very important. It is a little hard because there's tension on this caliper because the pads have springs on them that press against the caliper while you're installing it. So you may notice a little more tension putting them on than you had when you took them off. Make sure all your bolts are tight. And once we're done, we're going to make sure that we pump the brakes because you want as much pressure on those pads as you can get before you move this car, or you may not be able to stop. But we'll go over that before we finish up. But I'll go ahead and move on to the next side without narration and just have a time lapse so we have the brakes all done on the front of this vehicle. But those are the pads on the 2003 Chrysler PT Cruiser Turbo. We got the backing plates lubed up, and another thing you want to watch for is these pads do have a brake wear indicator on two of them. You'll notice that right there. They only fit on one side because the caliper won't get around it if you put it in the wrong place. So if you have problems putting the caliper back on because it's making contact with this, you may have to switch the sides your pad's on or flip which end it's on. Now, like I said, there's two of them, but they're on opposite sides. So if you find it's a problem, you may have to switch it from the right side of the car to the left side of the car. But right now, I think we're okay. My brake wear indicator is right here. So I'll get a shot of it. Alright, well you can't see it with the caliper on, apparently. Yeah, there it is. So it's not making contact. And what that's for is when the brake pad wears down to a certain amount, you see right before it reaches the backing plate, once that pad wears down, it'll touch this metal tab and start making a squealing noise when it hits the rotor. That's why when brakes are low, you start to hear a loud squealing noise. So it's the brake wear indicator. Some people just call it a squealer, but that's what it's for. And we'll go ahead and get the right side done and finish up this brake job. Okay, so I've been working on the right side, and I noticed that this is what failed inspection. This is probably right below minimum. Now, in the instance where one side of the car is wearing brakes a lot more than another, usually means you have an issue with a caliper or a collapsed brake line. Now, right now, I can't press in this caliper using my regular tool. It may be a stuck caliper, but we're going to see if we can break it free. I went ahead and pulled out my depressor gun, which is a little more powerful than the hand tool. We're going to see if we can force this piston in. If not, we'll break the line free to relieve any pressure if it's a collapsed line and see if it collapses. If it will collapse with the line off, we know the caliper's good and the line's collapsed somewhere. If we take the line off and it still doesn't collapse, we know it's a seized caliper. But we'll try pressing it first and see if that fixes it. After some work opening and closing the piston, it seems like we're still unable to collapse this piston enough to put the brakes on. So it seems like the caliper's seized, which is good news. We don't necessarily have to replace the caliper. We can disassemble it, clean it up and lube it, and hopefully get that piston freed up. Now that goes outside the scope of this video, but I'll do that over the time lapse and hopefully we can get this caliper back to working condition. Alright, so we got the piston out of the caliper, cleaned it up and lubed it, and it compressed, and we added some compressed air and the cylinder slid right out, so we know that we have proper amount of friction in the caliper piston. I got the brake line hooked back up, and I've opened the bleeder screw, so waiting for brake fluid to come through so we can confirm the caliper is ready to go. But the right side brakes are done. Just waiting for that gravity bleed to come through, and we'll put this all back together and move on to shocks next.
We'll be installing the rear shocks on the 2003 PT Cruiser. Now it's only the left rear that failed, but basically we're going to have to lift up the rear end to put the shocks on. Now it's not too hard. You'll disconnect the strap which extends the shock, and then it's just a single bolt that goes through both ends. Hardest part most of the time is just breaking that bolt loose, and sometimes those bolts break, so we'll have to be careful. But I'll go ahead and time lapse this, and I'll record it if any pertinent things come up.
With the shock fully extended, it doesn't quite reach the bolt hole. That's because when we released the old one, the spindle and everything dropped. So what we're going to do is relieve the pressure by releasing the jack and letting the rotor, the head of the rotor, set on a brick to raise up the rear end just a little. Now I'll slowly lower the jack and let this happen. Right where we want it. Alright? Now if we need to move this up or down to reach the bolt hole, we just adjust the jack. And there you have it. One shock complete. Pretty simple install. It's one bolt. The nut on this side is welded to the mount, so you don't need an extra wrench. One down here, the nut and washer come off, but it's indexed, so you don't have to hold a wrench on it. It will touch one of the supporting pieces of metal and stop. So we'll go on to the right side next, and we'll just time lapse that one, and we'll be done with the shocks.